is up, Compass students? How are we feeling? All right. Oh my gosh, we're gonna have to get better than that, you guys. We have 2 Australians that have come to hang out with you guys today. Lungs last night, me today. So I think God just wants you guys to be Australian. Does that feel like what it is? Yeah? Let me see how Australian you can be. If you know the ending of this, make it loud, make it proud, and you might just get some points. Ready? Aussie, Aussie, Aussie. What's your name, my guy? Isaac. You just won your team 10,000 points. I don't even know what that means. I don't know if I messed up the score points, but that's what we came to do today. Do you guys see what I've got here? Who's ever played Jenga? Who's played Jenga before? It's one of my favorite games. I played it as a kid. And isn't it so crazy? While I'm playing this, I'm going to play a quick game because we have some time, you know what I mean? All of you are just like, how do I get points? It's exactly how you get points. You be engaged in the message. Sound good? Yeah. Okay, cool. Even if it doesn't, purple team, you get what I'm saying, right? All right, cool. They get what I'm saying. Blue team, do you get what I'm saying? Red team, do you get what I'm saying? Hey, orange team, what's up? All right. That's my people. Let's do this. So Jenga. All right. I don't know what you're saying, but I like it. Here's how you play Jenga, right? Each of you takes a turn, and you have to figure out, oh, not that one, because you know when you start to move it and things start moving, you're like, definitely not that one. So you go down here. Anyway, so I grew up in Australia, right? And I heard that you guys have some bushfires happening here in Texas on the pan. See, you guys know your news, and I am so proud of you for that. Look at you go. And I heard that. I grew up in Australia with bushfires. And the crazy thing about bushfires is, oh, not that one, right? Is that there's this term called flashpoint, okay? And this term called flashpoint, when it comes to Australian bushfires, is it's this moment when everything gets so hot around you and the fire is getting so hot. And maybe up until this point, the firefighters have been able to keep it under control, but there's this moment when the heat gets so intense that suddenly everything that can burn up bursts into flames. The flashpoint is the moment, just like in Jenga, that everything in 1 second that was built up starts to tumble down. And I just wonder how many of us today are met with a flashpoint in our life. How many of us students came to this conference? How many of us leaders even came to this conference? And though you're here and you're playing games of Jenga and we're here hanging out and cheering for our teams, how many of us are truly, if we're honest, at a point in our life where it feels like the heat of everything around us has gotten so hot that in this one moment it feels like everything is crumbling down and we are dealing with flames on every side of our life? And it often happens right when you least expect it, right? Like just as you're starting to build things back up, just as you're coming to a conference ready to put God first, just as you got your grades back up to make it into that college that you wanted, just when you got onto that sports team that you've been training so hard for, just when you got that job that means that now you can actually afford things that your parents couldn't buy you before, just when you got to that moment that you found that new normal after your parents' divorce, just when you healed from that heartbreak, just in that moment, it feels like something happens and the flames start moving all around you. And you're like, where is God? Can we be honest? Where is God in all of this? You know, in Daniel chapter 3 in the Bible, there's these 3 Hebrew boys that I want to talk about today. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they find this moment of this flashpoint. They're in this moment where the heat around them gets so intense that everything bursts into flames. And they get thrown into a fire that just doesn't threaten what they have built up. It threatens the very breath in their lungs. Can I give you some context for the story that we're about to dive into? Is that okay? Cool. So in Daniel chapter 3, there's this king. His name's King Nebuchadnezzar. And I don't get how parents named their kids in the Bible. I don't pretend to know why he has Nebuchadnezzar. 5 syllables feels like too many syllables, does it not? Does that feel like anyone else? That's just like a lot. Anybody have 5 syllables in your name? Okay, yeah, I didn't think so. They're like, my name is Nebuchadnezzar. That is wild if that was to happen. So here's the deal. King Nebuchadnezzar, he lives in a place called Babylon. He overthrows this place and takes people from there, including these 3 boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, brings them back to Babylon and tries to brainwash them. He wines and dines them and treats them and trains them in the ways of their God, trying to brainwash them to forget who they are and who they worship so that they will become a Babylonian and live the Babylonian lifestyle. Why is it that when the enemy wants to attack us kids, he tries to go for the identity every single time first? Anybody ever notice that? That before he does anything to us, he wants us to forget who we are. But these boys, they weren't just worshiping any God. They were worshiping the God. They were Hebrew boys, and they were raised up in a family that told them about the 10 Commandments, told them who they were, not just who God was. They told them who they were. And so these boys, they got brought into Babylon, and they were like, listen, king, we'll serve this culture. We'll serve you as our king, but we're not going to bow our knee down to what you bow your knee down to. Yeah, we'll be excellent in all of our ways. In fact, they did such a great job at the jobs they were given in this new foreign land that they were actually promoted. They became like the king's BFF. Feels like the wrong term there, but I'm going to use it anyway. Like the king's BFF in a circle of what he was working and doing in his life. And so these guys, they're actually going really well. But they're like, when it comes down to bowing down to things, no, we can't do that. We'll serve you with our hands, but you can't touch our heart. Because we know who the real God is, and it went real well for them. Until the day that King Nebuchadnezzar decided to build a 9-foot gold statue to himself and play some weird Hunger Games version of musical chairs. He literally says to them, he's like, listen, you guys, you keep working, do your thing, I'm good. When you hear the music play, everyone stop, turn to the idol, bow down, and worship him. Weird. Where was Katniss when we needed her? You know what I mean? And these guys, they were like, listen, king, we agreed to serve you, but we're not going to bow down to the God that you worship. They have a moment where they do something that we need to learn in our world today, that this generation would shake up the world if we understood that we can serve our culture, that we can go to school and be friends with everyone, that we can be light in the darkness, but when it comes down to bowing down to the things that this culture and this world wants us to bow down to, we'll serve you with our hands, but we will not bow our knee to a God that is not the true God. That sure, you might be tall, you might be big, you might look gold, everybody else might be doing what you want to do, but as for me and my life, as for me and my house, as for me and my friendship group, as for me and my tribe, we will serve the Lord and we'll serve the world, but we will not bow to the gods that they have set up for us. We need a generation like that. So they don't serve him. We'll pick up the story in Daniel chapter 3. And the king hears about this and brings them into his court, and he's like, you guys, it was going so well. You were doing so great. And he gives them like another chance. He brings them in and he says this in verse 13. He, in a furious rage, gave the command to bring the boys to these before him. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the golden image which I have set up? So if you're ready, it kind of feels like he's like, ready, set, on your marks, get set, bow down. Like he's giving them everything that he can. He likes these guys. We can assume that the king was kind of fond of these boys. And he says, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the dulcimer, I don't know if that's a real word. I'm just pretending I know. If you say words confidently, life hack, people think that you know what they mean. It's wild, right? And then he says, when you hear the music, fall down and worship. But if you don't worship, you will be thrown into, at once, the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can rescue you out of my hands. Crazy thing. He gives him one more chance. Have you ever been in a moment in school, at work, with your friends, on your sports team, and there's so much pressure around you just to do that thing that you could totally justify doing, because if you didn't, bad things would happen. These guys, they weren't just imagining a fire. When the king was saying this, that fire that he said he was going to throw them into was right behind him. They could literally feel the heat of the moment, but these boys were loyal to their God. And they were standing in front of this idol in front of them, but they remembered the teaching that they had when they were little boys, when their dads and their moms would tell them. The Bible says that we will not bow down and worship any God but our God. We will not bow down to any idol that is not the one true God. They were loyal. And here's the thing about loyalty. Loyalty makes the commitment before it ever comes time to prove it. So they didn't need to think it over. They didn't need to huddle up. They didn't need to have a team tribe meeting. They didn't need to say, hey, can we go down and just pray about this for a little while? Just give us the weekend to think this over. No. They'd already made up their minds. Have you already made up your mind about what you're going to do when you go back to school? Have you already made up your mind about how you're going to answer your friends when they want you to go to that thing that you know good and well is not going to end well for you? Loyalty makes the commitment before you ever have to prove it. So they look at the king and they answer him, oh, Nebuchadnezzar. They don't even put the king in anymore. Do you notice that? It's like a little bit of shade right there. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to answer you on this point. Our God who we serve is able to rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will rescue us from your hand. But even if he doesn't, everyone say that with me. But even if he doesn't, one more time. But even if he doesn't, just kidding, one more time louder. But even one more time. One more time. Last time, I promise. We will not bow down. Even if he doesn't. Let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. I don't know who in this room I'm preaching to today. I don't know who's facing a fire right now in your life. I don't know what pressure you feel that you have to bow down to around you right now. But I pray that when you leave this conference, that you would have the faith of these Hebrew boys that say, God, I know that you can rescue me. And even if it doesn't look like what I'm praying about, even if the miracle comes in a method that I didn't see coming, even if I have to walk through this fire and you do not protect me before I have to walk through it, and you're with me rather than sparing me from this, I will not bow down. I will not go that way. I will not get into that relationship. I will not fall down to that thing, because I know who my God is. And because I know who my God is, I know who I am, and I will not bow down to something less than the one that created me. If there are some people in this room today that you'll say, that's me, I want to worship that God, I'm not going to bow down. I want you to give you 5 seconds to make some noise right now that you're going to say, I'm not going to bow down. Come on, where are they? Where are you? That you're not going to bow down to this culture. You're actually going to rise above and worship our God. No matter what happens in this fire. Did you catch what they said? They said, even if God doesn't rescue us from this fire, O king, we're going to be all right. I didn't say it like that, obviously. That's my version of it. My version of the Bible would be very different than the current version of the Bible. But these boys, they said, he's going to rescue us, whether we go through this fire or not. You see, there's 3 possible outcomes when we go through the fires of life. God can rescue us from the fire. Those are the moments that God rescues us before you ever have to go through the thing. Before you ever get the diagnosis and have to go to treatment, God heals you. It's those moments that your faith is built because God spares you from a fire. Who's ever been through a situation in your life that you prayed for and God seemed to rescue you before you ever needed rescuing? What's crazy about these times in life is that often we're not even aware of them. Why? Because you didn't feel the heat from the fire. But when you know God's rescued you in that way, it builds our faith. It does build our faith. Here's what's crazy is that God could have snapped his fingers and rescued these guys from the fire. He could have stopped the fire immediately. He could have gotten his whole army of angels and just like Captain America them out of there. So why did God not rescue these boys from the fire? You see, our faith doesn't just need building, it needs refining. And often God will allow us to walk through fires because it will refine the faith for the very thing that you're in this conference asking him to do. Often we ask God to do these miracles in our life, to open doors of favor in our life, not being aware that in order to sustain the favor that He wants to open for you, we need to have a refined faith that can sustain what He wants to give us. And that only comes through going through the fire. They could be delivered by the fire. The worst possible scenario, right, in our mind is that these boys die. The worst possible scenario in life, but guess what happens if they die? Immediately in that moment, the fire takes them from this life and they are transported for eternity to be with God without fear, without shame, without pain, without sickness, without any burns. They would immediately go to be with God forever. So that's why they could look at the king and say, whether God saves us from this fire, through this fire, or by this fire, He's definitely delivering us from your hand, my guy. And He's not going to leave us embarrassed. He's not going to leave us ashamed, because when we obey God and refuse to bow down to everyone else, God always shows up in the fire. He always shows up. So the king hears this speech, and he's like, right, well then obviously I'm going to throw you into the fire. And they're like, yeah, we figured that. And the king says, I want you to heat up the fire 7 times hotter than it usually is. So much so that, get this, the Bible actually says in verse 22 that because the king's command was so urgent and the furnace was extremely hot, the flame of the fire killed the men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fire. So the soldiers that put them into the fire actually died because the fire was so hot. So why did it kill the soldiers and not these boys? Anybody got that question in your head? I asked the same question. I like that. Absolutely, God. Are you kidding me? Of course, God. I think He's absolutely protecting them. You know why? Because there's a grace on the calling that God has given you that somebody else doesn't have. So somebody else is going to find impossible what God will actually allow and grace you for in your life. The problem is with us in our world and in our day and age that we're so busy walking around comparing our calling to everyone else. Why can't I do that? Why don't I get to do that? That we're comparing their grace to our grit, or our grace to their grit. And we keep thinking, why hasn't God graced me for that, when we actually need to just stop comparing ourselves to everyone around us and start walking in the calling that God has given us, allowing that there is a grace on our life to do the things that other people will find impossible. There's a grace on your life. So they're in the fire. And verse 23 says that they were thrown into the fire, still tied up. But it wouldn't be long. Verse 24, before Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded, and he stood up quickly. You see, the king thought that was the end of the story. He thought he was about to use these boys as a testimony of what not to do. You don't talk against the king. Poor King Nebuchadnezzar. He forgot for a second that at one point in the world, he didn't have breath in his lungs, right? Poor Nebuchadnezzar thought in this moment that actually he got it twisted a little bit. He thought that he had created the worlds. He thought he had flung the stars up into the sky. He needed a little bit of a reality check to be reminded that he wasn't here a long time ago, and that the God that had created him was the God that these boys were worshiping. And when we decide not to bow down to the culture, our God shows up for us, and He will not allow those flames to take you out. He will always protect us when we stand up against people that are against God. If God is for us, who can be against us? So he stands up, right? And he looks into the fire. In verse 24, it says that he stood up quickly and said to his boys, his counselors, sorry, my bad, my version of the Bible again. He says, was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the middle of the fire? And they replied, oh, yes, sir, I'm so sorry. We love you so much. Please don't kill us, kind of in their own little way. And he responded, he said, look, there are 4 men untied, walking around in the middle of the fire, unharmed, and the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods, unbound, unharmed, and not alone. Unbound. Weren't they thrown into the fire, tied up? Did I read that wrong? They were thrown into the fire, tied up, right? How did they get unbound? I'm going to tell you how they got unbound, because when God allows us to walk through the fire, it is never to burn the thing thing he created, just the things that the enemy created to be attached to us, which are actually going to become a barrier to the very blessing that he's trying to give to us. God was never allowing them to go through the fire to take out their very breath, just the things that bind them up. And let me tell you, for those of you that find yourself in a season where you feel the flames around you and you're dealing with something, maybe it was a fire that you put yourself in, maybe you're dealing with flames that somebody else threw you into a fire. Let me tell you right now that God will use it. God is not done if you're not done. If you still have breath in your lungs, you still have a story to be written. He's not done. You're not going to die. He's going to see you through this, and there will be a testimony on the other side. He is simply allowing the flames to prepare you for the promise that he's trying to give you. That's all that he's trying to do in this fire. 1 Peter 1 verse 6 to 7, it tells us that pure gold put in the fire, it comes out proved pure. And genuine faith put through suffering comes out proved genuine. You're just through the fire for a little while, but you're not alone in the fire. There were 4 men walking around in this fire. You see, I think that Jesus in this story wasn't scheduled to show up for 600 years. On the schedule, on the date in the calendar, that was like 600 years of flipping the calendar over before God was like, all right, yep, go into the world and do your thing in a manger. But I've always found that when I allow and submit to the Lord, allowing me to go through a season of a fire, God's never, he's never late, but he's rarely early to show up in our life, except for seasons when we'll submit to the fire, burning off the chains that have bound us up. God decided on this. I'm not just going to send an angel down. I'm not just going to send somebody else down. I'm not just going to deal with the flames. I'm not just going to take out King Nebuchadnezzar. I'm about to show him who the real king is. I'm going to show up in the middle of the fire, so much so that this story tells us that there were 4 men walking around. If that was me in the fire, I mean, you know how they say like people like freeze and fawn and fight and others things that start with F in terms of when you're like in crisis mode or something like that. I'm a freeze person. Who freezes in crisis? I fully freeze. If I was in the fire, I would just be like, don't move, don't move, don't move. We're okay. Are you okay? And they're like, yeah, I'm okay. Are you okay? Yeah, for sure. No, fam, I'm good. You good? Like, these guys were walking around in the fire. That tells me that there was a freedom on the inside of them, not just on the outside of them. They were unharmed. They were unafraid. So I came here today to free some people who have been afraid, that you have been frozen in your life, that you haven't been taking steps forward. You haven't been talking to your friends about Jesus. You haven't been standing up against people because honestly, you're just afraid. And if these boys can be in a literal fire and walking around and probably playing like air hockey or something like that, then I came here today to shake some people free, to say, I know you're going through the flames right now, but you're not alone. Don't freeze up now. It's time to walk around, because there are people watching on in your life, and this testimony is not even going to be that you see Jesus in the fire. It's going to be that they saw Jesus in your fire. You never know what will happen because somebody is watching your life. Because did you know, in this story, there's no record of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego seeing Jesus in the fire. Who saw Jesus in the fire? So many syllables, I know. Who saw Jesus in the fire? King Nebuchadnezzar. There's no record that these boys saw Jesus in the fire. So I know you feel alone, but you're not. I know you can't see the activity of God just yet in your fire, but I promise you, if you keep walking, if you keep praying, if you keep shaking off the chains that these flames in this season are burning off so that you're prepared for the future that you have asked God for, if you keep going, there will be people that come alongside you that tell you, I saw the way you dealt with your parents' divorce. I saw the way you dealt with that bullying. I saw the way that you dealt with that opportunity that somebody else got instead of you. I saw the seasons and the years and the months that you felt overlooked, and I saw you put God first. I saw you live unafraid, and I just want you to know that I came to faith because I watched how you went through the fire. They're watching how we walk through the fire. And the keys can come. I know Jesus meets us in the fire because I've experienced it in my own life. I've also learned as a church kid growing up in Australia that it would be so much cooler if people related more to my really cool stories than the times when I have bruises and cuts and pain to show for it, but it's not true. We relate more to the human condition of pain than we do to the mountaintop moments. And 10 years ago yesterday, I hopped off a plane at LAX with my dreams and my cardigan and my WWJD bracelet because I was a church kid. And I began living my life in Los Angeles. I started building a life. I was such a sheltered church kid. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. But I was building a life. I was making friends. I was working for a church that I loved. I got married. I wrote a book. I was speaking. I was doing all the things that I felt like I was meant to do in my life. But how many of you have ever experienced that just as you start getting along your way in your promise, just when you feel like God is about to start using you in your life, something happens, a flashpoint moment where everything crumbles down around you and you feel like God could never use you anymore. Little do you know it's at that moment that you're finally prepared. 2017, I got married and divorced in the same year, publicly in ministry. Walked down the aisle in the January, only to have a man that I promised forever to walk out in the December. There's no filter for that. And though you maybe can't relate to my own experience, though many in this room I'm sure have had parents who have walked through that journey and you've had to watch them and been very affected by them, I'm aware. You can relate to the pain of those plot twists in life that you never saw coming. Of those fires, of those flashpoint moments where the heat gets so intense, the fires start to encompass you everywhere, and you really think that this is going to be the thing that takes me out. This is the fire that I don't come out of on the other side. Suddenly, the thing that I swore that I would never go through became the fire in front of me that I felt like would consume me. I was certain that I had made a mess of my life that even God himself could not fix. But you know the beautiful thing about God is that he's not done if you're not done. He's not finished writing your story, even if you feel like this chapter is how it ends. And if you'll let him, he doesn't just want to show up in your fire. He wants to lead you out of it on the other side. I remember that God actually used this fire not just to refine my faith, but to teach me about the Father in heaven. I was so embarrassed. My dad had flown in when everything was kind of getting to its worst, and me and the church had decided that it would be a good idea for me to go back to Australia for a few months to grieve and to get some really good therapy. And it was also summer in Australia, and I don't know if you've seen Australian beaches, but they are pretty good. So we decided it would be a great thing for me to go and spend some time with my family. And as I was packing up my stuff, my dad asked me 3 times if he could help me pack my stuff up. But have your parents ever asked you something and you're like embarrassed? And you're like, I don't want your help, you know? I don't want you to see me like this. I don't want you to pick me up from this party right now, because truly on the inside, you're just embarrassed at how they're going to see you in your life. That was how I felt. So I said to my dad, no, don't come. I'll pack up my stuff 3 times. No, I don't want you to come to my house. I'll meet you at the hotel. So a few hours later, I finished packing up my stuff, and it is all gathered around me, all the pieces of my broken life in the middle of the living room. And suddenly I realize, I can't carry my stuff out. And it wasn't that I couldn't physically carry the stuff out, but have you ever been in a moment where you know as soon as you walk out that door, this makes this real? As soon as you leave the car, as soon as you leave that apartment or that house, or you leave that school, or you walk out of that breakup conversation, what is happening right now becomes a part of my story, and I don't even know if I want this to be real yet. That's where I found myself. And so it wasn't that I couldn't pick up the luggage on the floor. I couldn't actually emotionally or spiritually leave this season of my life, and so I knew I only had one option left. I had to call my dad. So I pick up the phone. He says, I'll be right there, babe. 4 minutes later, it was a 6-minute drive, but that's for a whole different conversation. My dad arrives at my apartment, takes my hand, walks me to the balcony, sits me down, prays for me, closes the season, comes inside, picks up my bag, gives me my handbag, and says, let's go home, babe. And in that moment, I followed my dad out of the apartment, down the hallway, and in that very moment, I just felt like the Holy Spirit spoke to me. And when I say that, I don't mean I heard an audible voice. I just mean I felt it so strongly on the inside. I knew it was him. And it was this small, still voice that said, Elyse, take a photo of this moment. This isn't just for you. It's for everyone else walking through a fire. And so I took a photo of that moment. And before they put it up on the screen, I want to let you know today, whoever is walking in a fire right now and you feel like it's going to take you out, or the people right now that you feel that pressure to bow down to everything else that isn't God around you, that you're like, I'm basically on one knee, I'm basically there, I may as well bow. I want to remind you today that if you will bow your knees to God, you can't bow down to the world, because you cannot bow to something else when you are already bowing to him. And some of you feel like God is so mad at you. You feel like you created the flames yourself. I've been there. I know how that feels. And you're embarrassed to come to God. But the God is not there here. He didn't come here today to punish you. He didn't come here today to condemn you. He didn't come to turn around and say, look at this mess you've made. Look at all this baggage that you've brought into your life. Are you kidding me? How could you be so stupid? The Father doesn't do that. The Father takes your weight and he leads the way home. And you can put that photo up on the screen today, because my dad reminded me who the Father really is. He didn't come to shame me. He didn't come to disown me. He didn't come to let me try to get out of the fire myself. The Father, the one who created you, the one who created you and called you his child, his daughter, his son, the one he fashioned in your mother's womb before they ever even knew you were there. He's the one that wants to come into the flames and say, I got you. I'm going to protect you. I'm not going to let this fire take you out. There's still going to be breath in your lungs. You've still got a story to write. And as for me and my child, if I have to, I'll come down to earth and do it myself. That's the Father that I worship. And because I know who I worship, I will not bow down to anything else. I don't know what you're facing today, but I want you, if you will, we want to do something right now. Because I know in a room like this, we can cheer for our tribe, but there are some real trials going on. And maybe people don't even know some of the stuff that you're really dealing with. The pressure to bow, or the heat from the flames in a fire that either you started or you feel like somebody else threw you in today. I want you to invite Jesus into the fire. And today, I want you to make that commitment that I'm going to be loyal to him. And my loyalty means that I make a commitment before it ever comes time to prove it. And the simplicity of it is you simply have to bow to the King. Bow to the Father. When you know who he is, that he's the one that takes the weight and leads the way home, it's really easy to bow. And the cool thing is that you don't have to worry about bowing to anything else when your knees have already bowed to him. So if that's you today, I'm not going to make a big song and dance of it. You know if it's you. You want to make that recommitment. Before I leave this room, I'm making a commitment of loyalty. Some of you have already done it. You already know where we're going with this. I'm going to be loyal. I'm going to bow my knees. Wherever you are, you can do it in your seat. You can come down to the front. You can come right here. If you want to bow to make that commitment, Father, I will not go out of this room and bow to anything else. I'm going to make sure of it because I'm making a moment to bow right now. I don't know what you brought into this room, but you leave it at his feet right now. I don't know what the flames look like, but I want you to bring it to his feet right now. I want you in this time of worship to have an honest moment with the King. Father, you see your children. You know their stories. They're not just a face in the crowd or a seat in a chair. They're your children. And Lord, right now, the ones that are still carrying the weight of shame, of decisions they've made, I hear you saying that is not who you are. You are not what you have done. You are who I say you are. And you are my child, and I am with you. I know what you did, and I made a decision when I created you that I wasn't going to leave you. So what you do doesn't affect how I feel about you. What you do doesn't affect what I call you. Who you are and how you act, it doesn't change that you're my child. God created the world with his words. He doesn't change his words about you because of the way you act. So Father, right now as we worship, would you come? It's our simple prayer. Would you meet with us? Be with us in the fire. Take our weight and lead the way home. Let's worship.